Hi, folks. It's such an honor to be here today with you. It's an honor to be here with you, Carmen, and thank you, Steve, for that warm introduction. We will get right into it. We are a remote work culture now, I think. I was going over with Carmen earlier some of the statistics that a full 17.9% of workers are remote. And that is down from 17.9% in 2021 of the pandemic, but a full 3 times as much remote work as before the pandemic. So that has presented new opportunities and new challenges for your job, for all of the work that you do, both if you are a manager and if you are managed. and so that's what we want to talk about today. But something else has changed, and it's something that Carmen sort of alerted me to, and that is something called the big stay. And I wondered if you could just talk about that a little bit, about the dynamics that are changing over the last, 6 months, year, maybe a little bit longer than that, and how that's affecting how you do your job at Yelp. And also, can you just tell people to start, how long has Yelp been fully remote?
So essentially, we've been fully remote since the pandemic thrust us all into this collective experiment called remote working. And we actually never announced a return to office date. When it was safe to do so back in 2021, we said we were going to be remote first. We opened our office doors, and our employees voted with their feet. And so on any given day, we had less than 1% of our employees showing up in an office. And for reasons that we can talk about, we realized for us that remote work was working. And so I think sometime in the middle of 2022, we announced that we were going to be a fully remote company. But to your point about the big stay, it's really interesting. I think back in 2022, the job market, particularly in tech, was absolutely on fire. We were just, trying to compete, particularly for engineering talent, was near impossible. And fast forward now, over the last 12 months, we are in an environment that looks a bit different. There still are job opportunities out there. Companies are still hiring, but there have been more layoffs. Companies are hiring more selectively. And so what we've seen is tenure really increasing. So at Yelp, in a year period, we've gone from average tenure of less than 2 years to almost 3 years, which is a really dramatic difference, which presents a lot of opportunities. Productivity is great, but there's also some challenges too in terms of keeping people engaged and growing.
Yeah, the quit rate has actually declined to a low of 2.2%. It's very, very low. And just a quick note, a pop quiz for the group. What city has the most remote workers? Austin, Texas. 24.9% of workers in Austin are remote.
I did not know that.
And Carmen, you are one of them. So you're embodying
a proud remote worker in Austin. Yes.
Well, let's talk about some of the challenges of managing a remote team. You're fully remote. There are some teams that are hybrid. Mm-hmm. There are some teams where there's work groups that are fully remote and some that aren't. But let's talk about sort of what you've described to me as a sort of an intentional approach to culture building. Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So one of the big questions has been, can you create culture in a remote environment? That was something that our board of directors has been incredibly interested in and had been pushing us on. And I think they've finally, they finally believe us that we can. And I say, yes, you can create and maintain culture in a remote environment, but you have to do so with intention. And it's not the same playbook. You can't just duplicate what you were doing in an office environment and translate that to home. So we do certainly a number of things. I think I would say, like, first and foremost, as an organization, Yelp has had a long-standing core set of values that have really guided our actions. And that has to be foundational. You have to live into your values. You have to show your values in action. You have to address breaches in your values, and leaders have to walk the talk. Otherwise, I mean, it doesn't really matter where you are, actually, right? Then the values. Then your culture is sunk if you're not living into your values. So culture is really about the stories that we tell and the examples that we hold high. And so we're really super intentional about sharing stories and examples about our values, our leaders demonstrating them in action, living into those values, and creating experiences that really help people feel like what we want them to feel when it comes to working at Yelp, regardless of where they are.
What kind of experiences are you creating for this purpose?
So we will do, one of the things that we have are employee resource groups. So we had employee resource groups before the pandemic. One thing that's been really super, I think, successful is now they used to be based on location. And so you'd have a chapter in San Francisco for women at Yelp, for example. And now those are global. And so employees can really join those conversations. And we've created this very active community of resource groups where folks can join and share their things that they're passionate about, both at work and personally. We do lots of storytelling sessions around our values. We create award sessions around our values so that we can really hold those examples. And then we create opportunities for people to come together, both in person. So if you're in a local community where there happen to be a lot of Yelpers, we'll create opportunities for folks to come together. We just did a global week of service, and we had virtual events as well as in-person events where employees can come together. So it's still espousing the things that are important to us.
Talk about storytelling a little bit. As a magazine editor, that's obviously an important subject to me. I think it's incredibly powerful medium and way to express values, certainly. Mm-hmm. But you mentioned the storytelling. Is that sort of a structured thing, so where you have people tell the stories of, say, a successful project or maybe an unsuccessful one, or what stories are being told? Yeah,
we do. So we actually have a structure that we call story slams. Right. And I actually just recorded one, and these were around our values. And so the value that I chose to talk about was authenticity. And so I gave a personal example of what authenticity means to me, being brave, being vulnerable, and have recorded that and shared that with our audience. And so we get leaders and employees at all levels of the organization to share those kind of things. But it's also something that we do when we think about things like learning and development, for example. And so helping, we learn through stories and connections. And so really helping people to bring their own experiences to light, to share times when things haven't gone the way that they plan, because that often happens, and things that they've learned from those experiences. So it's both, I guess, structured and somewhat unstructured, just with the knowledge that that's, particularly in a remote environment, the connections that we have and those conversations that we have are really what fuel that.
And these are recorded so that people can watch them sort of asynchronously, or is it sort of part of a program where you're gathering everybody together, either remotely or in person? I'm not sure which what the forum is, but how is it shown?
We usually do them live, and then they'll be recorded and sent out for people to view. And then even just in the structures that we have, we'll kind of encourage leaders to just tell stories in one-on-one interactions.
Yeah. How have things changed since you? What are some initiatives that you were able to implement when you came to Yelp? How did you change any of these processes or sort of culture building?
In terms of I think one thing I'd like to touch on, because I think it's germane to all of this, is really the way that we've approached employee listening, because that informs a lot of our actions. And when the pandemic hit, really, we had to recreate the employee experience. And we had to do it fast. And nobody knew what we were doing, right? I mean, if you can kind of think back to 2020.
I can confirm.
What a novel
No one knew what
experience that
we were
was. And so we really upped our employee listening touch points and did like more specific and targeted surveys and interactions with employees to learn from them so that we could quickly create the new playbook and really had to be willing to iterate on that, right? I think historically there was more of a sense that no, we need to bake it and it needs to be perfect and ready to launch. It's like, no, we're learning. And so we're going to learn and test and iterate as we do these things. And so, for example, like one of the things that we have really pivoted on as we've gone to fully remote is really creating a benefits package that really helps to foster the whole person experience, as you call it. So just really listening to our employees, what was important to them, the flexibility that they really valued, as well as implementing benefits to take advantage of that. So things like caregiver benefits, looking at flexible health and wellness benefits, mental health benefits. Like we have a stipend. It's actually our most popular benefit that we've introduced, and that's just a flexible benefit to enable people to take care of their health and wellness, and that can be used on anything from like gym memberships to cool running tights to acupuncture, so like those types of things. But it's really more about like creating a person first experience.
Yeah, and are there helpful frameworks that you use to guide some of those conversations? I spent a couple of years outside of the media industry working in what effectively was the tech industry. I worked at medium.com, and one of the big takeaways that I got from that experience was frameworks, and because we worked with a bunch of engineers and I don't know if how many people in this room have any engineers on the team or work with them, but engineers, it was such a helpful experience because they just want it what's really going on is what they're asking, right? And but they also like structure, right? So they're not afraid to note failures, want to note successes, but how did we fail, et cetera. But frameworks are so helpful with that. I just wondered if you use any of those in your work.
Oh yeah, I'm talking to a room of HR professionals. We love a framework, right? And I think one of the things that I've learned in the course of my career is the simplicity of the framework is really important for adoption. Little aside, but I think sometimes at HR, we're trying to earn our seat at the table. And so we're trying to show that what we do, like there's science behind what we're doing, right? And so we want to show all of our work, but that can be hard to adopt. We are competing for people's time and attention. They've got lots on their plate. So it's really trying to meet people where they are and take advantage of the interactions that are already occurring, what's already happening on a day-to-day basis, where we can kind of infuse some of that. So one of the frameworks that we've recently introduced is called Connected by Conversation. So I was mentioning the importance of conversations and interactions, particularly in the remote environment, but giving people something that is super simple. We've created 6 templates for the most common and impactful types of conversations that leaders can have with employees. So think about like your one-on-one, how to have an effective one-on-one with somebody, how to have an effective goal-setting conversation, how to have a conversation around execution, how to have a conversation when things go off the rails. But giving people something that is not a script, because we don't want to do that. We want leaders to come and be authentic, but kind of gives them like a menu of options and things to choose from based on what's going on. And these are like 2-page templates, but it's designed to like quickly put tools in the hands of managers and enable them to really amp up their coaching capabilities, because that's really how they're going to help their employees be more effective.
Well, and let me say thank you to you and to all of you for those frameworks, because I think when I come to an HR professional at work, that's what I need. It's like help. Here's what I want to say. how do I say it in a way that can help this person grow, and help make this work, Let's talk about the big stay for a little bit. You said, I think it was, from an average of 2 years at a place to average of 3. That is a huge, that's a massive jump. Yeah. And so one of the things I want to talk about is hiring, right? Mm-hmm. And the assistance and guidance that you provide on hiring. How do you play the long game with starting with a candidate and hire people that are going to thrive in this environment?
And I think there is a nuance there in terms of hiring people who are going to be successful in a remote environment, because that is a bit different. Mm-hmm. We are now 4 years in, and so there is a process of natural self-selection that has happened, because by now, and we've been fully clear, we've actually shuttered all but one of our US locations. So we're not going back to the office. So if you don't thrive in a remote environment, you're not going to choose to work for us. But back in 2022, when we had made the decision to go fully remote, and that commitment, we revamped our employee value proposition. And because actually the former value proposition talked about what it felt like to walk into a Yelp office. So probably a bit outdated, but really focusing on what we call work-life fit, and that flexibility that's inherent, but very focused on working remotely. So we're very clear about what it means to work remotely. We look for people who are going to be self-sufficient, who are self-starters, but can also collaborate across geographies. And it's just very ingrained into the conversations that we have with people. And we tend to include other folks from the team in that interview panel, so that we're really making sure that our candidates get a full understanding of what is it going to feel like to work here.
Yeah. Do you sort of say to people, here's what a typical month looks like, or what a typical work looks like? Here's what to expect. Do you sort of spell that out?
Yeah, I think the more specific you can be with people. We don't want to sell anybody a bill of goods, right? Because they won't be happy and we won't be happy either. So
yeah, absolutely. How do you keep tabs on someone who, let's say, just started, right? How do you support, either keep tabs on them yourself and your team, or support managers on just checking in, making sure people are thriving? Because I think that's one of the biggest challenges, right? Is we don't see people in person. You're not getting those cues. I think we're all sort of performative on Zoom, right? One of the things I do is I try and remember to kind of raise an eyebrow every now and then, or to just smile, because it's just this little box, but that's not the full picture of someone's, that's not necessarily an indication of how happy they are, how fulfilled they are. So how do you check in on those sort of critical early days?
Yeah, I think here's an example of where frameworks can be helpful and technology can be helpful. So last year we actually created an automated workflow. We use Workday as our HCM. So we created an automated workflow in Workday that just sends quick reminders to the manager about checking in with their employee on a regular cadence there. And they actually have to complete something within the first 30, 60, 90 days, so that we know that is happening. And we're very intentional about creating robust onboarding experiences for employees.
The managers have to complete.
The managers do.
Right. Sort of the check-in protocol or whatever. Yeah. I find one-on-ones are so helpful too.
Absolutely.
Right. I come from places where unheard of to do one-on-ones, like a regular check-in without a clear, purpose, right? And that I adopted as well. I just find it to be so helpful to check in on people. Talk about managing for outputs. There was this. We talked about this earlier, and I love that phrase. I am, I work. We have a kind of hybrid team, so it can be tough, to manage for outputs versus manage for what you're actually seeing, and attendance, right? Which seems so archaic, but just talk about that briefly.
Yeah, I think the philosophy has been we treat people like adults. Never, somebody can be sitting in an office for 10 hours a day and not necessarily be productive. So it's really shifting that focus from I see you, so you must be working, to I see the product of your work, and where and how you're doing it doesn't really matter as long as the end result is what we need.
Yeah. But just make sure you raise an eyebrow every now and then.
That's right. Yeah, it's definitely a mental shift, and not everyone, some people struggle more than others to make that. Yeah.
Well, on that note, Carmen, I want to say thank you for your time today, and thank you to Day One, and thanks to all of you for all of the work you do, assisting people like me, guiding our efforts. We couldn't do it without you. So thank you very much. Thank you, Carmen.
Thank you, Ross. All right. Have fun, everybody.
Okay.